world of tankers, welcome back to another one of my videos. I am Blitz, and today I'm going to be talking about the IS-2SH. Now this tank has just come into the stores today for the price tag of 6,500 gold, and just like my other tank reviews, I'm going to be talking about the vehicle, how to run it, everything you need to know, statistics, armor, all the stuff like that. And of course, at the end of this video, I'm going to be telling you my opinion on whether or not it is worth that price tag stuck on it. Now, the first thing I'm going to say right about this vehicle is it literally has the exact same gun as the IS-5 or really any other Russian run-of-the-mill heavy tank. It has 2,035 damage per minute, the same 221 pen. The heat, by the way, is amazing at 270 millimeters of heat penetration, and I would highly suggest you do load calibrated because it's going to bring your heat pen all the way up to 297. And that amount of penetration will easily be able to tear apart any opponent you really do come up against on the battlefield, so that is one really nice thing about the gun. However, it is not very accurate. In fact, the dispersion values are 0.389, one of the worst dispersion values you can really think of on any Tier 8 vehicle. However, there is one benefit to running the IS-2SH over an IS-5, and that is the aiming time. The aiming time on this tank is 2.45 seconds compared to the IS-5's 2.9 seconds. And as well, the on-movement turret rotation dispersion values are a lot better on the IS-2SH compared to the IS-5 as well. So what that means is that the tank is actually quite a bit more accurate because the aiming circle just doesn't bloom nearly as much as the IS-5. If you ever run a tank like the IS-5 or like the IS-6, you'll notice that the aiming circle is literally like a football field wide when you're trying to drive, and you're never going to hit crap. This gun, I actually tend to feel nice because you do hit some of your shots that you really would not be able to pull out in a tank like the IS-5. Another advantage of the IS-2SH is it has 7 degrees of gun depression. There are not really any Russian heavies that you can think of at Tier 8 with this gun that carry that amount of gun depression. So it is really nice that you're able to work the ridge lines, do your job, and really just tear apart the enemy. When moving on to mobility, the IS-2SH has the exact same top speed as the IS-5 at 42 kilometers per hour. Now it does back up just a teeny bit slower at 12 over the IS-5's 14, and it does also have a worse engine power than the IS-5. The IS-2SH has 700 where the IS-5 has 770. So what that does is it makes the power-to-weight ratio just a little bit worse at 13.2 over the IS-5's 15.82. So the tank will speed up a little bit slower and get into position just a teeny bit slower than the IS-5, but from my personal experience it's very hard to tell the difference on flat terrain or when you're really just getting up to speed. And as well, the traverse speed on the IS-2SH is not spectacular, but it's also not too bad at 25 degrees a second. But there is one really nice thing about this tank, and a lot of people don't know this, but the IS-2SH actually has a much better camo rating than pretty much all the other Tier 8 heavies in the game. And that's just because this tank is so low down and it's such a small target. It really just nips around the map and it'll tap you and it won't even be spotted until it shoots, and by then it'll be behind the ridge because it uses those 7 degrees of gun depression really, really effectively. And to be honest, I really like the tank because it's just a way more flexible version of a tank like the IS-5 or the IS-6, where you're able to get into position pretty quickly with that top speed. You're able to snap the enemy with your better aiming time than most of the Russian heavies, and then you're able to use your gun depression on ridge lines, brawl with the mediums. Overall, it's just a really fun tank to run, and as well, it's very, very unique. As you can see, obviously, it's a rear turreted tank, which means it has a completely different playstyle than a vehicle like the IS-5 or the IS-6. So I'll bring up the armor. When looking at the IS-2SH, you can see that it actually has some pretty decent armor. The upper plate of the vehicle sits around 240 millimeters thick all round, which means that you're going to bounce a decent amount of Tier 8 rounds. And as well, you can see the turret does have some very, very funky angles where the edges of it might get some auto ricochets all around. It does have some nice bouncy angles. Now, it does have weak spots on the cheeks of it, about 200 millimeters thick, but that's still a pretty tough penetration, and it's very tough to hit that, because if you miss the cheeks just by a little bit, you're either going over to the edge where you're going to auto ricochet right off, or you're going at the gun mantlet, which is actually about 400 millimeters thick to like 800 on this tank. So it's actually a very, very thick tank. However, there is one big glaring weak spot on this vehicle, which you can see already, and that is the lower plate. It's only about 115 thick, which means that even like a tier 6 medium tank would easily be able to penetrate right through this vehicle's lower plate. So at all costs, you want to hide that lower plate because everybody is going to penetrate it. But there is another big issue that I've really noticed with the IS, and that is when you're running the vehicle, if people can't penetrate you with their standard ammo, they just load premium ammo. And you can see here, this is an IS-5 aiming at me. It literally can penetrate everything on the tank. The entire upper plate is now easily penetrable. The turret is pretty much completely penetrable as well. And by the way, the IS-5 isn't even running calibrated shells, so if you were running calibrated, even more of the tank would be easily penetrable. But there is one nice thing, as I said before, is the IS-2SH has 7 degrees of gun depression. So when you do get it on that nice steep angle, that upper plate becomes about 302 millimeters thick. You're easily able to hide that lower plate over the hill, and because of this, the tank is actually very, very hard to take out. Now, it still does have the cheeks of the turret, which range now at about 180 because it's aiming down at you. So it does have some weak spots on the turret, but it's much harder to penetrate the tank like this because it's such a steep angle on that upper plate. It's also, since it's rear turreted, very, very good at side scraping, so you can peek the edge of the tank over, and you can see that the sides are still very, very tough to penetrate because the side of the tank is actually pretty thick, about 80 millimeters, so that does make some very, very good angles for side scraping. You can see the side of the tank overall is very, very thick. However, there is one big weakness of this tank, which the IS-5 really doesn't have, because the IS-5 is covered in spaced armor everywhere. The IS-2SH literally has 0 spaced armor. On the side, you can see the entire side is only about 110 millimeters thick. So because of that, really, the IS-2SH is easily penned by any takes in the side. And it's not the quickest at turning. The tracks are usually penetrated through, so it does not really have the thickest armor. And that's one thing that always set me back on the tank, was that really people can easily penetrate the IS-2SH as long as they know that they can shoot at the turret, they can shoot at the side of the vehicle. If you over-angle at all, you can go right through the track wheel. It's definitely not an extremely well-armored vehicle. But because it's so low down and it's got this really quick top speed, it runs very, very well on gun depression scenarios. I normally do not run the IS-2SH as aggressive as I would run a tank like the IS-6 or the IS-5. Personally, for me, I actually really like the IS-2SH, and the reason of that being is because it brings something brand new to the table. When you think of your run-of-the-mill Russian heavy tank, you're thinking of, a pike nose design like the IS-3 or the IS-5, terrible gun depression, terrible accuracy, decent penetration, where they can run around the map, hide their lower plate, and that's it. You're just going to take shells and send them back to the enemy. The IS-2SH, you really can't do that. First of all, as I showed you guys, the armor just is not that spectacular in the vehicle. So I don't run it like a full-fledged heavy tank. It's more like a support role. I can run it with the mediums. I can run it with the heavies. It's got enough speed to do the job at the medium side. And if worse comes to worse, you can always go back to the heavy side. You can figure out what you're doing in this tank. And it's just nothing like any other vehicle in the game. I really cannot compare this tank playstyle wise to any other vehicle in the game. First of all, it's rear turreted. You could say, well, the Chrysler is also a rear turreted tier 8 heavy tank, but they are just completely different playstyles. The Chrysler's got this completely huge, beefy upper plate armor. The turret's almost completely impenetrable in the Chrysler, and it's got the worst camo rating I've ever seen. The IS-2SH is almost completely opposite to the playstyle. You got to be a lot more careful. It's just a tiny little tank. You have to figure out where you're going, what you're doing. It's definitely a more skill-based vehicle. You can't just run out there like you would in an IS-5 and expect to bounce 50% of the shells because you got the spaced armor on the side and other stuff. This tank is very, very tricky to run. And if you're not super well with tanks that require a lot more skill or a lot more knowing on your angles and your penetration values and everything like that, the IS-2SH is definitely not the tank for you, because it definitely took me a while to get used to it. I definitely preferred a tank like the WZ-112 or anything like that because they're just easier to run than the IS-2SH. But once I figured out, you got to get that gun depression into use, you've got to really maximize the amount of damage from that you can output in the tank, you got to do all these things, you definitely start to learn how to play the tank, and it's really, really enjoyable because it's not the same game over and over and over. You get bored of an IS very, very quickly because, first of all, the gun is inaccurate. the tank, it goes the same thing. It's always the same sort of scenario in an IS-5. The IS-2SH, one game you're thinking, oh, I'll go heavy tank, then the next game you're thinking, oh, okay, I'll go medium. It's very, very different. You get to do this different sense of side scraping and everything else like that, and that's why I really like the vehicle. The question of whether or not it is worth the 6,500 gold price tag is completely up to you. I actually can't really answer this one for you guys, because for me, I like the tank. It's very unique, and I'd pick it over an IS-5 or an IS-6 any day of the week. But the thing is that I perform statistically way better in a tank like the IS-5 and the IS-6 than I would ever do in an IS-2SH, just because, frankly, the IS-2SH just doesn't do spectacular in battles where you get stuck up against tier 9s, or just games where the armor falls apart against heavy tanks, where an IS-5 can hold its ground. It can do a much better job in certain scenarios. So the IS-2SH is a very fun tank for me, and that's why I personally like it. But honestly, I don't think it's worth the price tag. It's just not a spectacular tank to pull out on the battlefield and win every game. But I can say one thing, is that it is a completely balanced vehicle. It's not overpowered, it's not underpowered. It actually makes a crap ton of credits, 175% credit coefficient, and its repair cost factor is like 31% better than an IS-5. So if you're definitely just wanting to get a tank that can grind credits and it's a new, interesting playstyle, it's definitely worth the price, because 6,000 gold is pretty cheap. It's like, what, $15, $20? It's definitely cheaper than your average tier 8 tank. And overall, I just think it's a pretty cool vehicle, but I can't give you guys just a defined yes or no price tag on the tank. But other than that, guys, I hope you did enjoy this video. As always, make sure to smash that like button down below if you did. If you didn't, hit me up with a downvote. Let me know why you didn't like it in the comments down below. Of course, make sure to subscribe. Let's get this channel to keep growing. Let's continue up there. Maybe someday we'll get up to 50,000. You never know. But other than that, guys, I hope you did enjoy this video. And I'll see you in the next one.